Hi, my name is Bijal Shah and I am a bibliotherapist and founder of Bibliotherapy, a bibliotherapy and literary curation practice. I'm also the author of the book Bibliotherapy, The Healing Power of Reading. I curate book prescriptions and provide online training in bibliotherapy. More detail of this can be found on my website, www.bibliotherapy.io. In this podcast, I share my knowledge and research on bibliotherapy, including the latest developments, science, and book recommendations. Join me every week where we take a deep dive into bibliotherapy. We release 2 episodes a week. Voice notes from me, your resident bibliotherapist, and Ask the Bibliotherapist, book recommendations for what's on your mind. I hope you enjoy the show, and if you'd like a bibliotherapist in your pocket, you might find my book, Bibliotherapy, The Healing Power of Reading, a helpful companion. It's available at any bookstore that you shop at. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and get new episodes as they're released. And as always, I love hearing from listeners. So if you'd like to get in touch, share any book recommendations or thoughts on bibliotherapy, you can do so at bijal@booktherapy.io. Thanks for listening. In this week's episode of Bibliotherapy with Bijal Shah, we're focusing on one of the most important and enduring books ever written about love, Erich Fromm's The Art of Loving. First published in 1956, it remains a profound meditation on what it means to love well. In this episode, I reflect on Fromm's lessons and how they speak to our present moment, to modern love in 2025, where technology, generational change, and cultural fragmentation have reshaped how we seek, give, and understand love. At a time when loneliness and disconnection are rising, and love itself can feel both urgent and elusive, it feels important, even necessary, to return to Fromm's wisdom and consider what it might mean to practice love as an art, a discipline, and an act of courage. Love is perennial. Yet every generation confronts it under different social, technological, and cultural pressures. In The Art of Loving, published in 1956, Fromm proposes that love is not a mere feeling or an accident, but an art, something we must learn, cultivate, and practice. His critique of modern society, with its commodification of relationships, alienation, and emphasis on acquisition over connection, still echoes strongly in 2025. The world now is more mediated, more fragmented, and more digitally intertwined than ever. What happens when we apply Fromm's ideas about love to our current moment? And how do generational shifts in values, technology, and psychology change the terrain of love today? In what follows, I'll revisit Fromm's central insights, explore their relevance and challenges in 2025. My hope is that the dialogue between Fromm and modern life will not only clarify the challenges we face, but also suggest practices of love that might yet be possible in a fractured world. Before turning to modern applications, it's worth summarizing the key lessons Fromm offers, not as unquestioned dogma, but as rich provocations for reflection. Firstly, love is an art, not a passive state. Fromm begins by challenging the widespread assumption that love is something that simply happens to you, a spontaneous feeling or event. Instead, he argues love is an art that demands knowledge, effort, patience, humility. Just as one studies and practices painting or music, so must one study and practice love. This metaphor has radical implications. If love is a craft, then one can be bad at it. One can improve. One can be more or less mature in it. It also shifts focus away from the question, whom should I love, toward how do I love well? Fromm's notion that love is a discipline recalls the patient devotion in Jane Eyre, a character who insists that integrity and love must coexist. It's the antithesis of the instant infatuation celebrated in much of pop culture. Jane learns that to love well is to love with moral steadiness, not surrender of self. One of Fromm's central critiques is that people tend to fixate on being loved, i.e., on their attractiveness, their value, their desirability, rather than on their capacity to love. He writes that most people see the problem of love as that of being loved rather than loving. This leads to dynamics in which people compete, perform, or commodify themselves to win affection. Fromm flips this. Mature love emerges when one shifts attention from the self wanting to be loved to the self wanting to love, wanting to give. Only when one can love generically, i.e., not only one special object, can only truly love a specific person. This shift from wanting to be loved to wanting to love echoes in nonfiction like Bell Hooks's All About Love, where she insists that love is a verb, not a feeling, a practice of care and attention. Hook modernizes Fromm's insights for a generation seeking healing after disconnection. Fromm breaks love into several components or capacities: care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge. Care is the concern for the life and growth of the beloved. Responsibility is responding to the needs of that person, not in a burdensome way, but sensitively. Respect is seeing the other as they are, not trying to possess or mold them. And knowledge is genuinely understanding the inner world of the other. A mature love does not degrade someone into an object, but preserves their autonomy. Fromm distinguishes multiple kinds of love, not as entirely separate, but as interwoven. Brotherly or human love, i.e., love directed to one's fellow human beings, rooted in a sense of common humanity. Erotic love is passionate romantic, but meaningful only when embedded in the foundation of other forms of love. And there is self-love, not egoistic vanity, but healthy acceptance and care for oneself. And then finally, there is love of God, the ultimate kind of love, the aspiration towards transcendence or the infinite. One key lesson is that you cannot wholly love one person unless your capacity for broader human love and self-love is intact. Then there is the disintegration of love in modern society: alienation, commodification, narcissism. Fromm is deeply critical of how capitalist culture tends to distort love. He argues that many modern relationships mirror a market logic. People treat one another as objects for consumption, evaluating exchange value, desirability, and utility. He also identifies narcissism, loneliness, alienation, and infantilism as threats to genuine loving. In societies focused on possession, status, and performance, love is often reduced to possession or validation rather than mutual growth. Fromm's critique of alienation anticipates Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where intimacy is replaced by pleasure and individuality by conformity. In our world of algorithmic attention, the parallels are uncanny. Love becomes transactional, a marketplace of curated selves. And lastly, there's the practice, the discipline, the concentration, the patience, the overcoming of narcissism. Fromm doesn't remain in the abstract. He insists that love requires practice, concentration from being fully present to another, discipline, continual effort, and the overcoming of narcissism and egocentricity. He also emphasizes that solitude is essential. Paradoxically, only by being able to be alone can one truly love another. With these principles in hand, how do they land in the world of 2025? A world shaped by social media, dating apps, algorithmic intimacy, existential precarity, and shifting generational norms. The challenges of the digital age are many. Firstly, there's the instant gratification and entitlement. Fromm's emphasis on patience and discipline sits uneasily against a world that expects connection instantly. Through a swipe, a message, a match. The impulse is to treat romantic connection as a commodity. If this doesn't work, I'll swipe again. It's antithetical to the sustained investment that love demands. Then there's the challenge of the curated selves and narcissism. Social media encourages people to present idealized versions of themselves. It cultivates self-branding, self-promotion. This intensifies the danger of being loved rather than loving. The picture of Dorian Gray remains hauntingly modern. The self a spectacle, the soul sacrificed for admiration. Third, there's the paradox of connectedness and loneliness. We are more connected than ever, yet many feel lonelier. The illusion of a constant audience can mask our deeper interior isolation. Fromm's idea that love is therapy for separation is more pressing now. We crave real depth under the superficial connectivity. Then, of course, we have algorithmic intimacy and mediated love. Dating apps, social media platforms, even AI companions challenge the boundary between genuine connection and simulation. If we adopt Fromm's claim that love demands knowledge, care, respect, and responsibility, then algorithmic matches, or chatbots, fall short. They reproduce the illusion of intimacy without the work. For example, Her, Spike Jonze's film, feels like a cautionary fable written for Fromm's audience. What happens when simulated empathy replaces relational effort? Of course, we all have to grapple with the speed, distraction, and fragmentation of modern life. The multiple platforms, multitasking, short attention spans work against the concentration and patience that Fromm says love requires. We must ask, can genuine love survive in an environment of distraction? And lastly, we must consider cultural fragmentation and the plural conceptions of love. In 2025, notions of gender identity, polyamory, non-monogamy, queer love, and chosen family are more visible and accepted. Any modern application of Fromm must respect plural forms of love and modes of relating, rather than assuming a singular romantic script. So, how do we apply Fromm's lessons in 2025? Despite these pressures, I believe Fromm still has much to teach us, and certain practices can help bring his wisdom alive today. For example, cultivating a posture of practice. Read, reflect, and learn. Treat one's own assumptions about love as material to be studied, critiqued, and transformed. Focus on slow gestures over viral ones, rather than grand romantic stunts optimized for social media. Small, consistent acts of care, presence, and attention carry more weight. Consider a digital detox and focus rituals. Regular times of disconnection deepen presence, avoid distraction, and recenter inner life are crucial. And for connection to happen, we must enable vulnerability within boundaries. Fromm insists on respect and autonomy, and that vulnerability need not mean the erosion of self. Embracing solitude, learning to be comfortable with being alone, because this is the ground from which genuine love can grow. And finally, practicing universal love. This could be in the form of work or activism, kindness to strangers, caring for communities, expanding love beyond the romantic relationships. But these practices feel demanding in a world primed for ease. The question becomes, how do we create social, technological, and cultural conditions that support them? There must be education in emotional literacy. Schools, workplaces, and media could teach care, attention, empathy, skills for loving, not just rational or technical ones. There must be a focus on cultural valorization of inner life. We need counter-narratives that prize inner work, reflection, and relational maturity. We need to have communities where we can practice love. This could be in book clubs, mediation groups, relational workshops, retreats, spaces where love is taken seriously, intentionally. And then, of course, the design of digital platforms need to be carefully considered. Could dating or social platforms be redesigned to reward depth, i.e., introducing long-form communication, slow matching, and encouraging getting to know one another, rather than the instant immediacy that we have all become used to? It is worth acknowledging where Fromm's model may face limits or critique in our time. Many people live in conditions such as trauma or mental illness that make patient, deeply mature love feel like a luxury. The call to discipline may sound harsh or elitist to those just trying to survive. Fromm's idealism might seem distant from the messy realism of contemporary fiction. In conversations with friends or open water, we see love filtered through class, race, and mental health. The structural realities Fromm only partially anticipated. Still, those works confirm his diagnosis. Love fails not only for personal reasons, but systemic ones, when survival itself leaves little energy for tenderness. Fromm writes from a mid-20th century Western psychoanalytic perspective. His views on gender polarity, eroticism, even love of God, may need reinterpretation or revision for plural, decolonial, queer frameworks. Love doesn't happen in a vacuum. Systems of inequality, capitalism, racism, patriarchy, and digital capitalism distort the relational field. You can practice love, but you also need to transform structures. The demands of practice can burn people out. If everything is work, love itself can feel like a burden. And Fromm's ideal must be tempered with compassion, rest, and grace. And then, of course, romanticizing older models of serious love can marginalize newer relational forms. One must not dismiss clear, poly, digital, or unconventional love. Rather, test them by the criteria of care, respect, knowledge. Thus, the challenge is not to idolize Fromm as a code of purity, but to use him as a provocation, a lens through which to examine, critique, adapt, and grow. If I were to sketch a tentative manifesto of how Fromm's lessons might evolve for our time, it might include teaching communication skills, self-awareness, relational boundaries from a young age, what I call relational literacy. Also encouraging slow love as countercultural practice, resisting the commodification of intimacy, cultivating gestures of endurance, letters, deep conversation, sustained care. Let screens mediate less than they dominate. Let love take other forms: friendship, non-monogamy, communal life, queer kinship. but always tested by the ethics of care, respect, and knowledge. Make solitude sacred. When we're comfortable being alone, we are less needy and more generous in love. And recognize that love flourishes in networks, families, neighborhoods, friendships, and not just romantic dyads. In a world of alienation, inequality, digital disembodiment, love is a radical act to see, to attend, to heal, to covenant across difference, and seek dialogue across generations, not to prove who's right, but to expand relational vocabulary, enrich understanding, weave communal wisdom. In the art of loving, Fromm offers a vision, demanding, expansive, hopeful, of what mature love might look like. He asks us to become architects of our own souls, to cultivate depth, to choose love as a vocation. In 2025, that task is no less urgent, but it is more complicated. Love must now navigate digital illusions, cultural flux, and existential uncertainty. Yet, precisely because the pressures are so intense, Fromm's disciplines of patience, humility, knowledge, and care may be more necessary than ever. And if different generations can learn, both from him and from each other, perhaps we can reclaim love as an art, a practice, a refuge, a force. So I return to the original challenge, not to ask whom to love, but how to love well, how to sustain love, how to heal loneliness in a world that often turns connection into consumption. In that spirit, I invite you to read, reflect, practice, and imagine new possibilities of courageous, humble, steadfast love. And as I end this episode, I'd love to share a quote that has always stayed with me from Fromm's work. In love, the paradox occurs that two beings become one, and yet remain two. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bibliotherapy with Bijal Shah. And as always, do write and let me know your thoughts. I love hearing from readers and always write back. Until next time, have a wonderful week ahead. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you'd like to sign up to our online courses or try a personalized book prescription or bibliotherapy session, you can do so following the links in the show notes. And as always, I love hearing from listeners, so don't hesitate to drop me an email at bijal@booktherapy.io.